The linen was my grandmother's, ivory with hand-stitched lace edges. I had pressed it the night before, smoothing every crease as if my love alone could keep the evening from collapsing. The wine glasses caught the candlelight in amber flares. The silverware glinted, laid out just so. Everything looked beautiful. Everything was beautiful. For a moment. Daniel was pouring wine when the doorbell rang. I heard Ella's voice float in even before I opened it. High, breezy, too loud for the stillness I had so carefully crafted. She swept into the room like a gust of cold wind, all lip-glossed charm and perfumed confidence. Her hug was airy and brief, her eyes already scanning the room, looking for something, or someone. "Aunt Liv," she chirped, setting her bag down like she owned the space. "Oh my God, this looks so fancy. Did you finally hire help?" I smiled with teeth, not warmth. "Just me and Ava." "Ava," she repeated, glancing toward the dining room where my daughter sat quietly, tracing the rim of her water glass. Of course. We all gathered at the table soon after, Daniel at the head, Ella to his right. I watched the way he leaned slightly toward her as he spoke. Their heads tilted just a little too close, laughter shared too easily. I brushed it off. Again. Dinner began like so many others had. Tight smiles, old stories, too much wine. And then, snap, it shifted. We were halfway through the roast when it happened. Ava had just said something sweet, something about painting the garden we'd planted together. Her voice was light, hopeful. It floated into the air like a soap bubble. And then Ella, smiling, always smiling, tilted her head and said, "Well, she's not really family, is she?" The silence hit like a dropped plate. For a split second, I didn't understand. I blinked, rewound her words in my mind. Maybe I misheard, but Ava's hand stilled midair. Her eyes, those green-gray eyes too old for 12, searched my face. "Excuse me," I said, too evenly. Ella laughed. "Oh, come on, I'm joking, obviously. You know, technically. I looked at Daniel, waiting, wanting, needing him to say something. He cleared his throat and reached for his glass. Nothing. And that was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. Something inside me, soft, protected, split. It wasn't the comment. Not really. It was why she said it, and why he didn't refute it. A chill ran through me, a slow, creeping sense that I was standing in the middle of a house of cards, and the wind had just started to blow. I forced a smile, turned to Ava, and asked if she wanted dessert. She nodded. Her small voice caught in her throat. I could feel it, the sting of otherness already lodged in her. Later, after the table had been cleared and Ella had left with an air kiss and a flippant wave, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, hands still wet from rinsing plates that no longer felt like mine. Daniel came in, loosened his tie like nothing had happened. That went well, didn't it? I stared at the sink. He poured himself another drink. "I didn't like what she said," I said slowly. He didn't look up. "She was joking. You know how Ella is." But she wasn't joking. Not really. He shrugged, sipped. "You're overthinking. She drinks too much. Gets mouthy." I turned to face him. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you defend her?" His jaw clenched just slightly. "Because I didn't want to make a scene. Jesus, Liv! A scene. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter every glass in the cabinet. Instead, I walked past him, up the stairs, into Ava's room. She was curled under the blanket, holding the old stuffed bear I had sewn for her when she was 4. The one with the missing eye and the patch where she'd tried to mend it herself. "Hey," I whispered. She looked up. What Ella said wasn't true. You know that, right? She nodded. but her eyes were glassy. "Do I look like him?" she asked, barely audible. My throat tightened. "You look like you, and that's perfect." I kissed her forehead, but I couldn't breathe right until I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. The perfume on my wrist, Daniel's favorite, suddenly smelled like someone else's skin. And as I stood there, under the hallway, light, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Doubt, real, pulsing, blood-deep doubt. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. If you asked me when I first began losing myself, I wouldn't point to a single moment. It didn't happen with a bang. It was quiet, like rain soaking through fabric until, one day, you realize you're cold and wet and don't remember when the storm began. I met Daniel at a gallery opening in the city, mine, actually. I was 28, fiercely independent, dripping in paint and dreams. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent. He didn't ask about my work, not really, but he smiled in that practiced way and said, "You're too pretty to be covered in acrylics." I should have walked away. I laughed instead. He took me to dinners in places with starched napkins and wine lists I couldn't pronounce. He bought me a bracelet, silver with tiny sapphires, and called it a little inspiration. I stopped sketching that month, said I was too tired, said I wanted to enjoy the moment. My sister warned me. She said he looked at people like they were puzzles he already solved. My mother said I was moving too fast. I defended him. I always defended him. We married a year later. I gave away my studio lease 3 days before the wedding. I remember locking the door for the last time, standing there with my keys in one hand and my heart in the other. The walls were still splashed, with color, unfinished canvases that would never be finished. "Love is a choice," Daniel had said when I hesitated. "And this is your future now." So I chose him, over everything else. At first, things were quiet, polished, structured. He liked routines, dinners at 8, gym at 6, company parties twice a month. I smiled beside him like a good accessory. I memorized the names of his colleagues' wives. I wore muted colors and said the right things. And then came Ava. She wasn't planned. Daniel didn't want children. Not really. But I thought it might fix what had already begun to unravel. His coldness. His distance. That strange, hollow look he sometimes had when he thought I wasn't watching. He didn't argue when I told him. Just nodded, like he was agreeing to another business deal. I convinced myself his detachment was just nerves, that he would warm up. He didn't. When Ava was born, he was in Dallas. He flew back 2 days later, held her for 5 minutes, and complimented the hospital room view. He never changed a diaper, never sang to her, never stayed up when she cried. But he bought her expensive things, dolls from Paris, designer dresses she outgrew in a month. And I told myself that was a kind of love too, a man's love, the only kind he knew how to give. But Ava noticed. Even at 5, she asked, "Why doesn't Daddy stay for stories?" I didn't have an answer. And then there was Ella, my sister's daughter, 5 years younger than me. Wild, bright, always pushing boundaries. After my sister passed, Ella drifted between relatives until Daniel offered to help. He said she needed structure, mentorship, that he could give her that. She moved in when she was 18. Just for the summer, he said. That summer turned into 2 years. At first, I thought it was sweet. He took her to gallery openings, bought her books, taught her how to navigate power, as he put it. She clung to his every word, called him D. I thought it was a nickname. Now I wonder if it was something else. I ignored the warning, signs, The way she laughed at his jokes before he even finished them. The way he looked at her across the table, not like a father figure, like something else. Something I didn't want to name. One night, I saw her slip his phone back into his jacket pocket during dinner. He didn't flinch, just kept cutting his steak. Later, I asked him if he and Ella were keeping secrets. He laughed. "She's a child, Liv. Don't be ridiculous." But something in his eyes dared me to push. I didn't want to know. Because knowing would mean tearing down the last thing I was clinging to. That maybe this life I had chosen, this man I had built my identity around, wasn't a mistake. That I hadn't traded my soul for a carefully curated prison. I busied myself with Ava. School runs, ballet recitals, Sunday pancakes. I poured all my love into her because I had nowhere else to put it. She became my anchor, my mirror, my reason. But every time I looked at her, I saw Daniel's absence like a shadow, and Ella's presence like smoke curling under a locked door. When Ella made that comment at dinner, "She's not really family," I knew it wasn't about biology. It was about territory. It was a statement, a warning. And for the first time in years, I was ready to listen. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed beside Daniel, watching the ceiling fan turn like the hand of a broken clock. Ava's door was shut, but I could hear the faint rustle of her turning in bed, restless, like me. The silence between Daniel and me was loud, louder than anything Ella had said. His breathing was steady, infuriatingly calm, as if the earth hadn't shifted just hours ago. As if our daughter hadn't been reduced to a footnote at the dinner table. As if he didn't notice or care how Ella's words had landed like a poisoned dart straight into Ava's chest. I stared at the ceiling until the first hint of blue leaked into the corners of the room, and then I got up. I moved through the house barefoot, the tiles cool beneath my feet. The smell of lavender still clung to the curtains. I'd sprayed them earlier, trying to make the house feel welcoming. It didn't. Now it felt like a stage, set, artificial and wrong. Something was clawing at me. A voice I had silenced for years. A word I couldn't ignore anymore. Secret. I remembered hearing it once, half whispered through a cracked office door, Daniel's voice low and sharp. No one ever finds out, understand? Not even her. I had thought it was about a deal, a client, a contract. But now, my fingers itched. My body moved before my mind could rationalize. I opened drawers, rifled through paper clips and tax documents. I emptied our filing cabinet. Nothing. Then I remembered the camera case. The old leather one he used to take on business trips. It had been collecting dust in the attic. I climbed the ladder like a woman possessed. Inside, beneath a lens cloth, was an envelope. Unmarked. I held it in both hands. It was thick, heavy. I brought it down to the kitchen, sat at the counter, tore it open. The paper inside crackled like it knew it held a blade. DNA paternity test results date, August 7th, 13 years ago. Subject A, Daniel Whitmore. Subject B, Ella Hargrove probability of paternity, 99.97%. The breath left my body. My hands trembled. I stared at the paper, reading it over and over, waiting for the numbers to change. Waiting for the reality to soften. It didn't. Ella wasn't just the niece I helped raise. She was Daniel's daughter, his child. He'd had an affair with my sister. Or maybe before we married. I couldn't even place the timeline anymore. Everything, blurred and twisted into a knot I couldn't untangle. But the result was the same. He'd known. For 13 years. And he'd said nothing. He let me take her in. Let me believe I was doing something noble. He sat across from me at dinners, holding his wine glass with one hand while his betrayal rested in the other. And the worst part? That comment at dinner. It wasn't a jab. It was a hierarchy, a cruel declaration. Ella knew, she knew, and he had let her say it. I dropped the paper. Staggered backward. I ran to the bathroom. Threw up until there was nothing left but acid and air. I slid down the wall, my cheek pressed against the cold tile. I sobbed so hard I thought I might shatter. The wedding ring on my finger. White gold. Engraved with forever. Always. Felt like it was burning through my skin. I pulled it off and flung it across the room. It hit the sink and spun in circles before falling still. My entire marriage was a lie. My role as Ella's aunt, as Daniel's wife, as the mother in this picture-perfect family. All a cruel script, in a play I never agreed to perform in. The perfume bottle on the shelf, his favorite scent on me, mocked me with its shine. I picked it up, stared at the label. Amour d'hiver. Love in winter. I smashed it against the mirror. The crack spread like lightning across the glass, and then something inside me went quiet, not numb, still. Like the moment before a storm breaks. I looked at my reflection, fragmented by the shattered mirror. Dozens of tiny Olivias stared back, one broken for every year I'd been kept in the dark. My voice was hoarse, but I spoke aloud, just to hear it. He does not get to keep this story. That was the moment everything changed. Not when I found the test. Not when I cried on the floor. But when I decided it wouldn't end like this. He could lie. He could manipulate. He could rewrite our history. But he wouldn't own my ending. I stood, up, washed my face, picked up the DNA results and slid them into a folder. Calmly, deliberately. The rage was still there, hot and trembling beneath my ribs. But now it had direction. It had purpose. I checked on Ava. She was still asleep, a soft pink flush on her cheeks. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You are mine," I whispered. "Always." And in that quiet, holy moment, I made a vow. To her. To myself. This story would be told. And it would end on my terms. I left before the sun had the chance to ask questions. Ava was still asleep when I zipped our suitcase shut. I didn't pack much. Just the essentials. A few clothes, her favorite books, a worn blanket with little stars stitched into the hem, and my old sketchbook. Not the new ones Daniel bought me to look supportive. The old one. The one with charcoal, fingerprints on the edges, and a coffee stain on the back cover. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? He would know I found it. He'd know exactly what I found. The train station was nearly empty when we boarded. Ava clutched my hand tightly, like she could feel we were stepping into something unknown. I told her we were going on an adventure. I smiled when I said it, so she believed me. We traveled south, far enough that the city disappeared in the distance like a memory I didn't want back. We got off at a sleepy little coastal town I'd once visited in my 20s, when I still believed in serendipity and soulmates. It smelled of brine and rosemary and wood smoke. I thought maybe that was a good place to begin again. I rented a cottage near the shore. Whitewashed walls, a small fireplace, uneven floorboards that creaked when you walked too fast. The kitchen had one window that overlooked the sea. That alone made it feel like salvation. The first few days, I barely spoke. Let the wind do the talking. I cooked simple meals. I watched Ava run along the beach with a red bucket, collecting shells like secrets. I didn't ask how she was feeling. I didn't have the language for her grief yet, and she didn't have the questions for mine. But at night, when she fell, asleep on the couch with sand still in her hair, I'd sit by the fire and open the sketchbook. It was hard at first. My hands hesitated, but the moment graphite met paper, something cracked open. I drew Ava's face, smiling in the tide pools. I drew the outline of our cottage, the curve of her shoulder beneath the blanket. And then, slowly, other things came out. A ring lying in an empty dish. A girl behind a window, watching two people laugh inside a house that once belonged to her. A mirror split down the middle. My grief had a shape. It had color. And I poured it into page after page, until the sketchbook became less of a journal and more of a release valve. A place where truth could exist without consequence. I started painting again. I borrowed supplies from the tiny local art store. The brushes felt unfamiliar, but my hands remembered. I set up a small easel by the window and painted while Ava napped or read beside me. One afternoon, a woman stepped into the cottage unannounced. She had thick curls tied up in a scarf, dark eyes, and paint smudges on her wrists. Her name was Maya. She owned a local gallery down the hill. Said she had seen my work through the window. Said she'd never seen grief painted with such grace. I laughed. Grace was the last word I would have used. But I let her look. She asked if I would contribute something to her upcoming show. My first instinct was to say no. I hadn't shown my art in years. Not since Daniel. Not since I traded color for compliance. But something in her voice made me pause. "This one," she said, pointing to a half-finished canvas. The woman who left the frame. "There's pain in her stance, but look at her eyes. That's not a victim. That's someone returning to herself." I looked at the painting as if seeing it for the first time. A woman with wind-blown hair, stepping out of a golden frame. Her feet were bare. Her hand held a ring, not worn, but clenched. And behind her, a dinner table, long and opulent, with a single empty chair. I said yes. I said yes because I was tired of hiding. Maya gave me a corner in the gallery, a little sign with my name. Olivia Whitmore. No pseudonym, no disguise. I told Ava later that night, while we watched the stars from the porch. She smiled, eyes wide. "Does this mean you're famous now?" I laughed. "Not even close." She leaned against me. "I like this version of you." And something inside me broke open again. But this time it didn't hurt. This time, it healed. As the weeks passed, Ava blossomed. Her laugh came easier. Her shoulders relaxed. She asked fewer questions about Daniel. She didn't mention Ella at all. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she looked at me with quiet certainty. "You're going to make sure they know, right?" she asked. "That I belong to you?" I nodded, my voice catching. "Always," I said. "Always, baby. You're mine." Later, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the wind brushing against the glass like a lullaby. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote one sentence in careful, steady ink. "The truth, told in full, is the most powerful form of revenge." And underneath it, I began writing everything. The affair, the silence, the lies, the DNA test, the betrayal. The way Daniel smiled while his daughter insulted mine. Not to publish. Not yet, but to remember. Because stories rot when hidden too long, in darkness, and I was done rotting. The first time someone called me an artist again, I nearly cried. It was Maya, of course. She said it so casually, leaning over a fresh canvas, coffee in hand, smudges on her jeans. "You've got something real here, Liv. This isn't just grief, it's inheritance." The word landed in my chest like a stone in a still pond. Inheritance. Not money, not bloodline, but the truth of what's passed down and what we choose to pass on. I titled the collection that day, Inheritance. Each canvas became a confession, a reclamation. I painted a broken perfume bottle lying in a pool of light. I painted a child's silhouette behind a frosted glass door, watching, waiting, forgotten. I pressed a strand of Ava's hair into wet paint and let it dry there, gold and permanent. Didn't paint Daniel's face. I painted his absence, the space he took up, the damage he left. People came to see the exhibit, not crowds, just a slow trickle of quiet women mostly. Some lingered longer than others. Some cried. One left a note beneath the canvas with the shattered mirror. It read, "I see myself in her." That was the first time I realized the story wasn't just mine. And with that, I made a decision. I didn't want revenge. I wanted ownership. Of my voice, my daughter, my history. So I started collecting, quietly, carefully. I found a lawyer, discreet, methodical, a woman who didn't blink when I slid the paternity test across the table. Her name was Janine, and her eyes held the kind of calm that comes from helping women clean up beautiful, shattered lives. We gathered everything: financial records, emails, hidden accounts Daniel thought I'd never see. I had copies made of the paternity results. I documented the timeline. When Ella came to live with us, the month surrounding her mother's death, it had been ruled an accident. A fall down the stairs. No one questioned it back then. But now the gaps felt like chasms. I didn't accuse, not yet. But I looked, and I remembered. How quickly Daniel filed for guardianship. How my sister's journals had gone missing after the funeral. How Ella started wearing perfume that wasn't hers, lipstick too red for her age. How Daniel bought her an emerald pendant identical to the one he gave me in our first year of marriage. Maybe it wasn't murder. Maybe it was just convenience. But either way, it was power. And I had lived too long under the weight of his quiet domination. Not anymore. At night, Ava and I read books by candlelight. She asked me once if we would ever go back. I said, "To that house? No, never." She nodded, satisfied. Good. She had stopped calling him Daddy. That, more than anything, told me we were healing. I finished the final painting in the middle of a storm. Rain lashed the windows. The sea crashed against the rocks with a fury I felt in my bones. I painted for hours, didn't stop to eat or drink. My hands moved like they were remembering something older than language. When it was done, I stepped back. It was her. Me, a woman in a scarlet dress stepping out of a gilded frame. Behind her, a long table set for ghosts, empty chairs, untouched plates, crystal glasses catching light no one was around to admire. In her hand, she held an envelope. Her other hand was open, empty. She wasn't clinging to anything anymore. The painting was called "The Woman Who Stayed Too Long." I wrapped it in canvas and stored it in the back of the studio. 3 days later, the invitation arrived. White envelope. Gold calligraphy. Ella Whitmore and Nathaniel Carter. Request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Daniel's name was on it too, printed with pride. Not mine, not Ava's, but it didn't matter. Because I was going, not as a guest, as a witness, as a woman reborn. I packed carefully, an emerald dress, tailored and bold, my hair pinned back, my heels sharp enough to make the ground remember me. Ava wasn't coming. She chose that herself. "I don't need to see them," she said. "I already have you." I kissed her goodbye and told her I'd be home before dark. I meant it. I wasn't going there to start a war. I was going to end one. The estate hadn't changed. Same gravel driveway, Same manicured hedges. Same house with too many windows and not enough soul. The guests were milling around the garden when I arrived. Some recognized me. Most didn't. That was the beauty of transformation. It makes ghosts of the women you used to be. I held the painting in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. Inside, the reception was a blur of champagne flutes and string quartets. Daniel stood near the head table, laughing. Ella wasn't far, radiant in white, her back turned. I didn't wait. I walked to the center of the room. Silence trickled in, slow and unsure, like a wave receding before the crash. I set the painting on an easel I'd brought with me, unveiled it, gasps. Then silence again. Daniel froze. Ella turned. And then I spoke. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. This is my final piece. It's not for sale. It's not for you. It's for her. I pointed to the woman in the painting. The woman who stayed too long. The woman who left. The woman who became. I opened the envelope. Inside, copies of everything, paternity, financials, a typed letter addressed to Daniel, signed by my lawyer. I placed it beside the guest book. Then I turned to walk away, but I stopped at the door. Looked back just once. Daniel's face had drained of color. Ella's lips were parted, trembling. Good. Let them sit at their perfect table, surrounded by ghosts and shame. I walked into the sunlight, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The air smelled the same, that strange combination of gardenias, old stone and power, the kind that came from money and control, not integrity. I remembered this scent. I had once tried to bottle it into candle wax and convince myself it was home. Now, it felt like a place I had already buried. The wedding was held at the estate. Our estate. The one where I had once hosted dinners, and anniversaries and charity brunches, smiling through gritted teeth while Daniel held court like a polished king. The same house where Ella had called Ava a stranger. I hadn't wanted to come back. But some battles are only won in the place they began. I wore emerald. Deep, jewel-toned, backless. Not out of vanity, but as a statement. It was the color of rebirth. The color of Ava's eyes when she laughed. The color of the first painting I sold under my own name. My heels clicked with purpose across the marble floor. I carried no purse, only a small velvet folder tucked under one arm and a slim canvas wrapped in cloth in the other. I found a seat at the far edge of the reception hall. The same hall where Ella once hovered too close to Daniel's shoulder, sipping from his glass like it was her birthright. The guests buzzed with champagne and expectation. Laughter rang like bells. My presence went mostly unnoticed. A ghost, drifting through a party of the living until the music faded and Ella took the microphone. She was stunning, radiant even. Her white gown clung like smoke, her voice soft and slow as she began her speech. To the man who showed me what family really means. I stood. Her eyes flicked to mine. The microphone trembled just slightly in her grip. I walked forward, unwrapping the canvas as I did. With the other hand, I placed the velvet folder on the head table. Daniel's expression faltered for a blink. Then I spoke. Before we celebrate inheritance, I said, my voice steady as steel, let's talk about the one you tried to bury. The room froze, chairs creaked, wine glasses stilled midair. Someone whispered a curse. I opened the folder, pulled out the paternity test, creased but undeniable. I held it up like a mirror. This is Ella Whitmore, Daniel's daughter, my niece. Conceived through betrayal, raised in my house, and until a few months ago, hidden from me. Gasps rippled through the room like waves hitting shore. Daniel rose, pale and rattled. Olivia, That's enough. No, I said. You've had enough. Enough time. Enough silence. Enough of me. He took a step forward. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. I just stopped pretending not to. I turned to Ella. Her face was a war. Pride battling panic. I raised you. I gave you shelter. I made excuses for your cruelty because I thought you were broken, not calculating. But now I see. You're exactly who he made you. I set the paternity test beside the wedding cake. People were staring now. Phones were being lowered. Heads were tilted like flowers toward the sun of a scandal they didn't see coming. I stepped back and unveiled the painting. The woman who left the frame. It stood taller than I remembered. The figure of the woman stepping free, the table of ghosts fading into shadow behind her, the envelope in her hand glinting gold in the painted light. This, I said softly, is me, and I'm taking her home. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply left. The doors echoed behind me as I walked out, the sound slicing the air like the final cut of a ribbon. Outside, the wind was waiting. I climbed into the car Ava and I had rented for the day. She sat in the passenger seat, barefoot, sketching in her journal. She looked up as I slid in. How'd it go? She asked. I smiled. It's done. She nodded, turned a page, kept drawing. We drove away in silence, the estate growing smaller in the rearview mirror until it became a memory I no longer owed anything to. 2 weeks later, the gallery exhibit opened to the public. The full inheritance collection. It drew attention, not for scandal, but for soul. Reviews called it a masterclass in personal reclamation, a quiet war cry. A woman from a nonprofit bought The Woman Who Left the Frame and said she'd hang it in their shelter's art therapy room. That meant more than any check. Ava and I settled in a new town shortly after. She started a new school. I opened a small studio with Maya's help. It smelled like turpentine and fresh beginnings. One night, as we sat on the porch watching stars blink to life, Ava rested her head on my shoulder. Are we safe now? She asked. I looked at the sky. Not just safe, I said. We're free. She smiled. Can I keep drawing her? Who? I asked. She turned her notebook around. It was a sketch of the woman who left the frame, Ava's version. A little different. The woman had Ava's curls, my eyes. Her hands weren't empty this time. They were holding a paintbrush. She's you, Ava said, but she's also me. I wrapped my arm around her. Then let's keep telling her story, and that was how it ended. Not with vengeance, but with truth, and that was enough.